Hello, everybody, and welcome to another State of. Today we are talking about the state of CSS frameworks. We're going to be talking about how to better write our styles in style. We're going to be talking with knowledge leaders, our panelists, library, methodology authors, and CSS aficionados about recent features added to CSS, developments in how to write more effective, maintainable CSS, both on small teams and at scale, and what libraries and trends you should be investigating on your projects. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today as you file in. I will say that we will be taking questions from the audience. So if you have come prepared with questions about CSS, how to write better CSS on your team, issues that your team has encountered when trying to use popular CSS frameworks or libraries, or just issues that you've dealt with as your project's gotten older and larger, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them as we continue our conversation. But first and foremost, I just want to introduce a little bit of who we are. This.labs is our sponsor for today. This.labs provides architectural guidance, staff augmentation, on-demand subject matter experts, temporary CTOs, one-on-one pairing, mentorship, and open source strategy support. We love our clients. If you're interested in seeing some of the work we've done with our amazing clients, make sure to look at our portfolio page at this.co/portfolio. Or you can come work with our amazing team. We are hiring. So if you're a software engineer or a DevOps engineer, send us your info at jobs@this.co. We also want to do, continue to announce something that we've released somewhat recently, which is framework.dev. Framework.dev is a place to search for top web technologies, compare key features, and discover community-curated resources to help you learn. As of right now, we have Angular, React, and Vue framework.devs, but we are currently working to expand to other new and exciting technologies, maybe upcoming ones in Solid or Quick or any of the other ones that people are excited about. But definitely check these out and let us know if there's anything that isn't included in there, and we'll make sure to get it added. As far as our upcoming... Oh, I suppose I should be advancing the slides too. I tell you what, people, it's hard to get good help these days. All right. As far as our upcoming events, we have our Women in Tech Monthly Mentoring. So our Women in Tech Monthly Mentoring, one of our greatest events that we host here. It is live event only, so there is no recorded version. So make sure that you definitely sign up for it to be reminded when that happens. We're going to have Tara Manichik joining us. Gosh, I hope I got her name right. Apologies, Tara, if not. Is joining us to talk about how to get the most from your manager. So if that sounds interesting, definitely make sure to sign up to attend that event live. Then we'll be having the State of PWAs on November 8th. We'll be chatting with GDEs, open source maintainers, library authors, and others to talk about community initiatives, API integrations, platform integrations, and features that help developers deliver cutting-edge applications. Then our Women in Tech Monthly Mentoring comes back again in November. Join Milika Alexic along with Tracy Lee, topic TBD. But again, our Women in Tech Monthly Mentoring is going to be tomorrow. If you're watching this live, tomorrow on October 19th. So definitely make sure you sign up for that tomorrow, and then it'll come back on November 16th. On November 17th, we'll be having our React Mentoring. Speak to React experts and ask questions in a small, welcoming group of community members. You can ask specific use case questions or even just network and chat about tech career advice. This React Mentoring and all of our mentoring events, again, are live events only. So definitely sign up and make sure that you attend that live, because we will not be producing a recording for that, just to create the right kind of environment for people to hang out and have the conversations that they'd like to have. As for your host for today, I am Rob Osell. I'm an architect and engineering lead at this.labs. Let's see, I've been, using CSS for forever. Super excited about many of the frameworks that we have represented here today. I think I have used all of them, at least at some point, and have become extremely enamored and excited by all of them at some point. So I'm very excited to be talking with the people that we have assembled here today. And I'll pass it over to my co-host.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Wilkins. I'm a software engineer over at this.labs. I'm kind of newer to the industry, and I really enjoy working with CSS as well as a lot of the frameworks that we're going to be talking about today. So it should be a fun panel.
Wonderful. And we will have our guests introduce themselves, starting with Anthony.
Okay, hello, and my name is Anthony Fu, and I'm a creator of Uno CSS, and I'm also the coding member of Vue and Vite. So I'm currently working on open source at Nux Labs. Yeah, And that's me. Thank you.
Great. Miriam?
Hi, I'm Miriam Suzanne. I co-founded Oddbird, which is a web agency, and I work on both CSS and SAS languages. So good to be here.
Wonderful. Adam?
My name's Adam Argyle. I work at Google. I'm on the Chrome team and the DevTools team working on CSS and making sure these things have excellent harmony. Been a fan of the web and writing CSS for many years, and I have an open source library called Open Props. It's just free CSS variables. Looking forward to the conversations of today, though. Thanks for having me.
Great. Julian?
Hello, I'm Julien, front-end developer at Orange, mainly working on the design system of the company as a tech lead, and also a core team member of Bootstrap.
Wonderful. All right, second.
Hi everyone, my name is Segun Adebayo. You can call me Sage. I'm the creator of Chakra UI, an open source React and Vue.js component library. I'm also the creator of Zach.js, a framework agnostic library of components built with state machines.
All right, Siddharth?
Hey, I'm Siddharth. I work on the design system team at GitHub, and I maintain a few open source libraries. I think UI DevTools is the one that I'm currently looking at the most.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Jay?
Thanks for that. Howdy all. Thanks for having me. I'm Jay Tompkins. I also work at Google. I am actually on the same team as Adam, so I work on CSS UI and DevTools, and yeah, really interested to hear what everyone has to say today.
All right. Well, I'm not sure how many state of sort of regulars we have in the chat, but I think everyone can appreciate that the introductions were short and sweet, leaving much more time for our conversation. So thank you, everybody, for that. To kick things off, I will pass it to Jessica for our first topic.
Okay, well, so our first question deals with something that came out of the 2021 State of CSS survey. So the two biggest pain points that people have brought up were browser compatibility and architecture and maintenance. So my question is, what is the current state of CSS at a team level for large projects? And then what are some CSS frameworks that are helping with that? And then what are some gaps that still remain there?
Who wants to jump in first?
I mean, CSS is really hard at scale, even through methodology adoptions, through tooling. You kind of trade off where your complexity goes. Your complexity could be in your really long index.css style sheet that's just one big sheet, and that's hard to scroll. Or it could be that you've abstracted yourself into a folder of nested folders of doom, and now you're like, oh yeah, that file gets imported here and placed there after this one, but before that one, and then you add in this stack, and I think it gets really hard kind of no matter what you choose. So we're building bigger and more complex applications than we ever have before, so we can't expect our CSS to somehow be magically simpler. But there are some tools that people have built in this stream that I can see that do help mitigate some of this. I'm curious to see how to hear like things that are going really well for them in their kind of chosen strategies for avenues to tackling this complexity.
Anybody else want to jump in on that? Well, I guess just sort of maneuver it, like for example, Anthony, I know, you're working on Uno CSS, and I guess what I'm curious about, right, is we've had, in the last 7 years, I think 7 years ago, I think all of the complexity management was all in the sort of SAS and less world. I think Bootstrap and Ionic were really big at the time to kind of as another way to kind of manage or sidestep in some ways the complexity of CSS on a project. Over time, right now, Tailwind, Windy CSS tools like this became very big. But then you developed a tool like Uno CSS. So I guess what I'm curious about, and with this question is what is the challenge that you're seeing now that teams are adopting some of these tools and frameworks and methodologies that creates an opportunity, for a new tool to step in and solve that? Like, what is that problem, I guess, that teams are still struggling with now that we have a lot of these tools and they've so many years now matured?
Okay. So yeah, probably I would say that's probably I'm the less relevant people to be here, since actually Uno CSS is actually a bit like a compiler in JavaScript, but it just happened to be the output is CSS, but it actually doesn't really related to CSS. So probably I'm not the best one to answer these questions, but the problem I would face in developing or like maintaining Uno CSS is that I feel that indeed, just like Eden says, the complexity just shift to another place. So for example, like Uno CSS is an atomic CSS engine. So we implement the full compatible Tailwind CSS preset. So basically, there we in Tailwinds that we have a lot of conventions to say you're combining with these utilities to the other utilities, and they would work, or like they would behave like something. But since this kind of like you have to memorize that, your team have to memorize that, and maybe you got some surprise to when you have some combinations that doesn't really like being expected by the original design. And then we have another problem is that if we have all the utility CSS or atomic CSS, the generation order is really relevant. So in some case, you want to some utilities to override some others. So we have to have a correct orders in our generative CSS. But that would mean that you basically like you have 1,000 of utilities you need to sort them. But if you have another thousands in another page, you cannot directly merge them. So the current solution is that you just have like 2,000 together as a one CSS for both of your two pages. So something like this, we kind of still struggling to have a proper solution for that.
I think I want to notice that there are sort of two different types of complexity that we can talk about. One is a complexity of using all the tools and knowing what all of the different options are. And that can be complex in some ways. And another is a complexity of trying to figure out how one tool is going to solve all of our problems. And I feel like in the industry, we sort of swing between those. Or lately, there's been a move towards like, let's limit our tools because that feels simpler. Everything is going to be a single class or whatever the rule is going to be. We're only going to use Flexbox, not Grid, etc. We do a lot of limiting our tools, thinking that's going to help complexity. And I'm not always sure that it does. I think sometimes that just adds a different complexity. I mean, maybe that's sort of what Adam was saying, moving complexity around. The other thing I would say is the cascade is designed for that. It is designed to say we have different style concerns in play. Some of them should override others. How are we going to decide which ones override which? How are we going to specify that? And that's what the cascade is for. So we have a tool for it. And that tool is getting better. We've got cascade layers now, so you can more explicitly specify what overrides what. And that sort of captures specificity in a localized way. So you can create bigger architectures that maybe are overall more complex for using more tools, but are simpler locally in that you're not worrying about global impacts all the time. Also with things like scope coming, I think there's a lot happening to sort of help address these problems.
Yeah,
So what do
I think
oh,
I'd love to I'd love to add a bit more to one more complexity that I see with like CSS in general, and I think this differs from team to team, and I think that one major scenario that we see is if you have a team of 5 people, there's a high chance that maybe one or two are pretty good with CSS, and then the rest are just like pretty much average, and they just know the basic margin padding, and that is it. Right. So the question then becomes like, how do you build with those tools, with those different gaps in CSS knowledge? How do you end up building a tool that is maintainable over time? Because one of the things I've seen in practice is even though like most of the specs and CSS itself is pretty declarative, I think the usage of CSS can sometimes be a mess within a code base, right? So if you stuck with just native CSS, it gets pretty complex pretty fast. And it's like there's so much cascade in when it comes to like if I change this single class, I'm not sure which component is gonna break because like they're so interconnected. There's some CSS imports somewhere else, and things just break from time to time. And I think that like this gap here in knowledge in just understanding the basics of CSS, specificity, cascade layers, and things like that. I think it's really important we emphasize that people should learn these concepts. At the same time, I think it's also fair to not expect everyone that uses CSS to know them, and this is where CSS frameworks come into play to help you to basically create that level ground where everyone can at least communicate. And then if you want to go outside of that to make your own structured CSS, I mean, if you know what you're doing, pretty much you can go into that zone and craft artistic CSS, something that would blow minds, basically. But then there's just the basic bare minimum like CSS that everyone needs to write to build features really fast. And this is where utility class frameworks like CSS or Tailwind comes into play. And I think that even in raw CSS, I mean, I found open props also very useful by Adam. So shout out to Adam for that. So like there are many tools. In the end, I think that it all comes down to how do we serve the business we're working within, and how do we help drive the product vision forward. Because we could talk about many tools. We could swing between CSS and JS to CSS utility classes, but I think we're all trying to solve the same problems, which is build features for the companies we work within and we work for. That's just my 2 cents, I think.
I think I'll chime in. I think, yeah, they're really good points. I kind of think of it as like there's two categories of complexity, right? Like there's actually knowing how to style something, how to actually apply this. And then like once you've got to that point, it's like, how on earth do I get this in a browser in a performant way? And it kind of leans back to what Adam was saying. Like I've got index CSS and I browse, I scroll it for 5 minutes to get to the point where I need to change something, or we start looking at layers and scopes and things. And obviously, if you're playing framework bingo, Tailwind has already been mentioned. But that's like those kind of tools. Sometimes, I'm sure we'll get into the weeds of this, but sometimes people just hone in on the fact that it's atomic, right? And it's like, that's its thing. But with a tool like that, its purpose actually is kind of like across the board. One of its biggest strengths in Tailwind is actually that it takes those kind of like decisions away. Like I don't have to worry about what's my critical inline styles and things like that. Like it's going to work it out for me, which is quite an overhead if you're trying to make a performance site. So I understand why people reach for these things. But then someone asked the other day, everyone seems to know Tailwind. Do I need to jump on this? And my answer was, well, without one, right, the other doesn't exist. So like foundational knowledge is still timeless. But it goes exactly to what Miriam was saying. It's like, how do we get that balance of complexity and tooling? And is it restrictive, or is it just finding that sweet balance of like, hey, you can use the foundations and here's the tools that make that a bit easier. Maybe that's what we're really looking for. I don't know. Like, conversation killer. Brilliant.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up about Tailwind or utility CSS methods in general, because is so much chat about it, and it's almost taken that if you bring it to the JS framework world, kind of the React ecosystem, like, should I learn React? It's like there's other frameworks that have different trade-offs that you can learn, or no framework at all. All of that is completely acceptable. But yes, a big one that's used on many projects. Maybe you want to keep an eye on it. But what was always funny to me is when I first heard about these kind of approaches, before really Tailwind was really much of anything, was I loved it because it made communicating with between developers and designers easier. Because instead of trying to get them to, what was all the rage like many years ago, maybe some teams are still working this way, is to get the exactly specced out Figma file or whatever, so that the developers could say this is exactly 2 pixels different here, and this is exactly this size. And you would get these, the whole hunt for pixel perfectness was just fraught with so much peril, and that led to so much custom CSS code that was never reusable and never maintainable. And suddenly this move to like more discrete utility methods meant that, okay, we're not going to worry if it was 3 or 4 or 4 rems or 3 pixels, but is it which of our 5 spacing thing options is it? Which of our 6 font size options is it? And just pick the one that's closest. And it sped teams up. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. That's a debate. That's a conversation that can be had. But it was so funny that for me was, no pun intended, the first utility I got out of those types of libraries, even more so than I'll think some of the things that some people rave about and rage about nowadays with respect to them.
I the cog started wearing when Anthony was talking about merging styles and Uno, and I worked on a thing called Styletron quite a few years back, and that has a similar kind of concept of you write your styles in JS and then it merges them and creates like a smaller style sheet for you. And it's like maybe that kind of tooling that where we're kind of helped to make things smaller, but we still know how to write it. I don't know. Just a tangent for us to talk about. I don't know.
Well, if no one's biting, we'll switch a little bit because Miriam, I wanted to pull you in and mention something that I thought was really interesting, which was that that you'd recently announced a new feature to come to SAS and or to SCSS, and I'm curious if you wanted to kind of introduce that, but then on a more broad topic. I think some people might be surprised to hear that tools like that are still being developed. I think to a lesser extent, we have Bootstrap here as well. And I think some people have not gone back to Bootstrap maybe in a while and look back on it, just sort of assume these technologies to be locked in place. I think there's analogs elsewhere. It's so ubiquitous. It's such a foundation that people kind of forget that those tools are evolving as well, when there's a lot of the newer, flashier tools. So I'm kind of curious if you could maybe explain what the new feature was that you just announced, and also kind of broadly what the team is kind of looking at as how it evolves these tools that so many teams have depended on and continue to depend on, and most don't even realize they still depend on in their stacks.
Yeah, what we're working on right now, and SAS is actually developing faster than it has in years. There's a lot happening, but we were watching, part of this is Adam's work. We were watching the new color tools coming down the pipeline in CSS in browsers, starting to ship in browsers. And we thought color management is something that there's a lot of cases where the browser can do it better. But there's some cases where you want to figure it out on the server side. And I would say that's the idea that keeps SAS going, is like we have servers and we have browsers, right? And it's great that CSS is becoming more powerful in browsers. SAS is powerful server-side CSS. It's like running Node on your server. Some JavaScript is on the server, some is on the browser. We can decide what needs to be where. So even if the features overlap, they can still both be useful. And color management seems like a good opportunity for that. So we're rolling out color management for wide gamut color spaces, all the new color spaces coming to CSS. So OKLCH is sort of the big one, or display P3, but being able to define colors in any space, manipulate them in any space, convert them to other spaces, do gamut mapping where appropriate. All of that seems like things that would be useful to do on the server sometimes without needing to have the browser figure it out.
It was funny seeing the I can't remember where it was, but the recent announcement to add basically the ampersand syntax to CSS specification. And I think a lot of the conversation that we had internally in our team was, we thought that was part of the CSS specification. You just didn't realize how, you know, how much you've grown to rely on it. And I think it's sort of an interesting double-edged sword. I mean, it's what a crazy awesome feature, what an ability to test something out in user land for so long and vet it before it gets added to the standards. But at the same time, I think there's always been this question with frameworks in general, which is that you know, when the user land begins to rely on this, they start to blur what they know. What they know of CSS is sort of intertwined with what they know of the frameworks, and it can be sometimes hard to disentangle them. So I don't know, what do you all think about that? Like, are we doing a good enough job of helping people learn what are their tools and what is the platform? Is there room to improve there, or is this just an overblown concern?
I can say at SAS, we're trying pretty hard to move away from anything that could be, make sure that the syntaxes are clearly separate. So we make sure that nothing transforms unless you're using a special syntax for it. And there's some legacy things like and, where when we started with that, it was a custom unique syntax, and it isn't anymore. There's legacy issues there, but yeah.
There's a trend also where you have TypeScript and Sass that are like, hey, paste CSS right into your Sass file and then upgrade as you go. I like this trend of languages. This is sort of setting standards as the baseline, which means anything you know in standards land works great here. And then as you layer in, so you're asking about this muddled kind of murky water, where if the foundation is at least that baseline, you can expect people to just build upon what they already know, which hopefully means newcomers are coming into Sass, newcomers are coming into TypeScript, and they can feel comfortable as long as you haven't gone overboard. But maybe that's where things can feel kind of extreme, is you can open up a TypeScript file that doesn't look like JavaScript anymore, or you can open up a Sass file that is leveraging every feature that it can. It can look much different than CSS. So I agree that while we're shooting for a really healthy initial starting baseline, we can find ourselves into TypeScript being very, you open it up and you feel very rejected as a JavaScripter. But I don't know if that's good or bad. All I know is that most people gradually get there. Like, again, like coming back to complexity, I feel like complexity is always gradually acquired. CSS is, so I think it's even in our like, agenda plan here is like, CSS is easy, right? Well, it's like, well, yeah, changing the color to red is easy, and that's really satisfying. But that's just layer one, right? And then you're like, oh, well, I'll just add another layer of a style in here. And then you're like, oh, layer two, you're like, oh, I need a dark theme. All right, layer three, oh, I need reduced motion. Let me handle reduced motion. Layer four, oh, I need some good focus styles. And then all of a sudden your button, I love talking about buttons because they're an iceberg of complexity. Just, I don't know, I don't think people sit down and seek overdoing something, you know, like I don't know anyone that sat down and be like, oh, I'm going to over-engineer this. Actually, no, Chris Coyier has done that before. He sat down and be like, I'm going to over-engineer this single page app just for funsies. Right? I'm going to load React just in the footer, only when you scroll there for funsies. But yeah, like our tooling is in this state where it initially starts really healthy, and it's us that bring the next level of complexity. So sometimes we want to blame our tools for being complex, but I think we brought it to the table. It's just sat there by itself. You know, it wasn't complex chilling on the table. It was us. And I don't know, sometimes us devs don't always think about how much we're the problem too.
Stop making your pages so pretty and it will go away.
That's so true, though. Yeah, the prettier you make something, the more it works for the more users. Naturally, the more you had to add. There's very little scenarios where you take something out and it gets prettier, right?
Okay. I guess while we're on the topic, Julian, same question sort of you, right? Like Bootstrap is a tool that people have used for years and years and years, and different strata of developers. They've used it, stop using it, come back to using it again. How do you like what are the developments that have been happening that you've been seeing? What is the general thrust? Like where is Bootstrap trying to go sort of generally? And is there a need for, gosh, I don't know what the right word to use here is, but the mature frameworks, maybe is the correct way to say it. Do you have to respond to what are the trendy frameworks? Do you kind of stay secure in kind of what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do? How do you kind of approach that as new tools come out?
We're trying to make evolve Bootstrap with the new technologies, and for instance, we are working on integrating the CSS variables in order to create the dark mode you're gonna love. But yeah, the dark mode isn't yet in Bootstrap. It's gonna be in the next version. But yeah, we got a lot of new features. So the team is small. We got a lot of issues to tackle and pull requests to tackle because we got a tons of users that use this framework, but differently. We got issues. You talked about the button just previously. And it appears that our users are not using the button like we expect them to use them. So we have a combination of different classes. We got a BTN class, and you're going to use another BTN class in order to create primary buttons, toggle buttons, etc. But in fact, the users are simply are going to use the BTN class, and they're going to override the style by themselves in pure CSS. So it's difficult to answer to all the questions and all the usage we have because we don't really know how the users use the framework. And each time you modify something in the framework, you're going to have issues because it breaks something that you don't even know it is used like that. So yeah, in terms of technologies, we're focusing on the CSS variables. We are studying as well web components, how Bootstrap can be used alongside web components, or maybe integrate in the future our components as web components. So yeah, it's still evolving slowly, but it's evolving.
I was happy
Julian,
when you all
think,
started. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I actually feel you a lot because like CSS for design systems is a separate topic of its own that we need to sort of like talk about, because I mean, when we talk about design systems like components and creating classes, or I mean even just making reusable CSS for components, it's very hard. I mean, especially like when it comes to like figuring out how people want to override styles for components, and you don't know like the CSS declaration they want to use. You don't know the different combinations and variants they want to use at the same time. So it's definitely a big problem you're trying to solve. But I mean, if there's any way I think that we can help, I can help personally, I mean, feel free to let me know for sure.
Yeah, as you say, the combinations are awful. You got this ton of CSS variables that needs to work with the SAS variables and all the combination of the classes and the utilities, etc. It's a nightmare sometimes, just to be able to reproduce the use case of the users in order to fix something.
It's hard with classes. One of the benefits of classes is composition, and one of the hardest parts of classes is composition. Right? I don't know how to get around that other than you give people freedom, and then they have the freedom to mix them in ways you didn't predict. So yeah, you're trying to, standards has to do this, CSS working group has to do this, HTML working groups, they're trying to predict the future by looking at the past and current, and I don't know, it's a really, really difficult job. And And so we're even seeing a rejection a little bit. Right now there's a trend towards attribute-based styling, which has a state machine-like mentality, right? You can only have one value in your attribute at a time. Well, that's actually not true. You can totally put spaces and fuzzy match in there, but I don't know if that's even the right answer here. I think composition is a good strategy. And so sometimes it's funny how these pendulums swing, right? As we're like, hey, it's really hard for me to put button and button primary and button outlined and whatever to kind of like get to a destination. But at the same time, do they really want the single attribute that's one long attribute? That's kind of like what BEM came from. It's like, let's just make a naming convention that sums up the, well, then you have the REST conversation also, where REST is like, we've made abstract endpoints for you to get your data. And then you're like, yeah, but now I need a special one that's got this weird name that does all the combinations of data on the server and then just gives me one endpoint. And you're like, well, what did you want? Did you want the options of the 4, or did you want just, and I still don't know the answer to these things. I'm just still observing and trying these things out and swimming through the options, just enjoying how they all can make good outcomes. But they also all come with a gotcha that you have to be mindful of, and it's tough.
It's so funny that you bring that up, and but the piece about composition, because the thing that I'd seen a lot on teams, maybe it's still true, is that a lot of teams that I saw sort of getting into doing, a large amount of CSS, anything beyond just a single component, was that they tried to lay out the CSS to be identical to the HTML. So they would just try to like style the page from scratch. You would see them say like HTML this, and then nest in, and then the section, and they would expect it to kind of all flow down that way. And they expected it to kind of just be this one-to-one kind of idea. And I'm kind of curious, I always anticipated that was more both from a bad mental model of CSS related to HTML, or if that was because object-oriented programming was such a big thing that was being taught. Like, from the people that you're dealing with, the teams that you're working with, do you think that compositional type development is becoming more popular? I mean, we're certainly seeing it in frameworks. I mean, Anthony, you can speak to this, right, with your Vue.use and everything else. Composition style APIs are so big in JavaScript frameworks now, but I'm curious if the host of developers now find that to be a more natural development style because they're getting it from every direction, or if this is still a challenge that teams are facing, and this is just the older developers or people that came from a different training background were having this problem. Like, is this still something that's difficult, or are developers kind of adapting now?
Yeah, I'm supposed to answer. So
you could.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, for my idea, that's maybe let's take an example of Vue. So I guess that's to have like the composition or like fully customizable, or like give you the full freedom, is something that's give you the more possibility, I guess. So for example, like in Vue 2 that we use the options APIs, it's really fixed. So like maybe that's the author or designed by this way to say, okay, this is a pattern or like a usage that we recommend you to use. So that would be save you a lot of time, something like that. But I think the problem is that when it comes to some stages that you got more complexities, or like you want to build a more large app, something like that. So you kind of reach the limitations like from the original design that's like the author or like the spec like designed to do. So when we kind of design something that I think we tend to be more flexible to trying to offer more options for user to use, or otherwise they may get some blockers. So we would like to offer the flexibility. So when they face some blockers, they can have the other way to work around to solve their issues or to achieve something they would like to do. So I think that's something that's maybe back to a few years ago that's people won't consider about. We won't consider that using a like WebGL to render something like fancy in the web, something like that. I think we tend to that's one of the source from the developer or like from the designer, tool designer aspect. But yeah, I think that indeed creates some chaos.
it's curious too. Design systems are often a grab for limitation. They're like, here, we're going to limit you to empower you. This is even something someone might tell you is a tailwind benefit, which it is, I think. But the converse is that by limiting someone, you naturally will create tension when things evolve. And evolution was something composition can really help with, because, well, you didn't predict the future. You gave people the small primitives that they needed to assemble futures, which is kind of neat. And I just see design systems, which are very popular, in a direct tension with empowering people for the future, where design systems are constantly gathering the lost sheep and like hardening a solution and being like, this is the way. And then other people are off going, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna, knock off the wall here that you built and pave a new path to show this future you didn't anticipate. And then, and then the design team that's on the design system teams has to like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. We'll scramble to get that integrated into our firm beliefs. And I don't know what's right here, but I think tensions are kind of fine sometimes. Often people like want to shun tension, and I'm like, I don't know, the tension's there because that's just a reality. And I like that the design team is constantly hardening and trying to firm up strategies while there's other teams that are out there imagining. And I don't know. Anyway, I guess I'm just rambling about these tensions, but we get there through our different strategies that we try to design and decide on to work as a team together to try to do something grander than just ourselves. And this stuff's really hard. Frameworks are in there to help us. Strategies are in there to help us. But there's still, each step we make is like a direction away from a different strategy that might have helped us in another way. And I don't know how you're supposed to reply to that rambling I just did. So I'm just going to mute myself now.
I think it's not all lost to ramble. I think I can relate to the ramble a lot, where I work on a design system team, and they're constantly trying to figure out what are the right boundaries to help people make the right decisions faster. But then also we do this by looking at the past and guessing the future and making those boundaries. Because when we say composition, you still need to define a few boundaries and hope people compose those boundaries on top of each other. And when we get that right, it really works. But when we get it wrong, that's when we see the tension the most. So even with escape hatches and overriding, I think these two things, flexibility of overriding and good boundaries for composition, I think by design, these patterns don't work together. Like we're stacking two things that are opposites on top of each other so that folks can compose something good. But I think by design, and like that's why we say like the front end pendulum swings a lot, because sometimes this becomes a tooling problem. Like if everything is atomic CSS generated based on your content, then you probably don't have these problems. But then you run into trade-offs of how do you override reliably, how do you manage the order. And then if you go to the other swing of the pendulum and you make these boundaries as strict as possible, then you end up with a lot of unmaintained dead code CSS that was written to override something, but now that HTML structure has changed and this code just sits there. So I guess part of the job is like, and I think this isn't the layout where like CSS is easy, but putting CSS in the right place is probably the hardest part.
This is where the conversation of at layers, and you saw me do this when Miriam was talking about cascade layers, because they can trap an entire set of specificity into a layer, making any subsequent layer, like an overrides layer, win without the important symbol. And I'd love to see something like, CSS or styled components. Someone was asking about CSS and JS. If we had a CSS and JS concept that was putting things into layers, this would be a phenomenal advancement where you could now, because there's many benefits to layers, but one of them that I especially like is this asynchronous mentality where styles show up later, which normally means they showed up at the bottom, which means they win, right? They're like last in, they're on top of the dog pile or whatever. But with @layer, you can define these layers up front. Some component lazy loads, lazy injects its styles, and it puts its styles right up into the components layer. And any overrides are still overriding that component easily with smaller selectors, with less specificity. Or even if you want, inside of that layer, you could put an ID selector with an import and feel like you made this really strong style. And then the layer comes behind you and just targets the paragraph and goes, color red. And you have this like, there's a new wave, I feel like, with @layer specifically helping manage atomic CSS, styled components, CSS and JS. All of the CSS strategies have a way to leverage and benefit cascade layers that's still relatively untapped by us all. And so I'm going to implore everyone that's watching to go study cascade layers. They will look complex at first. I kind of rejected them at first and was like, this looks like more, and I don't want more in terms of my cascade. Like, it's already hard enough. And it turns out it drastically simplifies things. It also allows you to name them, and naming them means you can have like the styles sidebar in DevTools will tell you the purpose of the style, where it came from. Is this an override? It's in the override layer. Is this a component layer? It's in the component layer in the styles pane. So it's like, we get all these benefits, and I'm just waiting to see what we do with it as a community, because there's, like I said, I think every tool has an opportunity to leverage layers to enhance and make and simplify our workflows. And just wanted to throw that out there, that layers is pretty rad.
I was going to jump in and +1 on the layers. Linda Thompson in the chat just asked about this as well. Like, how would you override component libraries? And yeah, you pretty much just went over layers. Another one as well that we both love, right, is you can import a URL of some external thing in your CSS and give it a layer name as you import it. Like, how rad is that? And we do this thing in our demos quite a bit, where like a CodePen demo, for example, if you're trying to teach someone something, you can do all your layers and then just put a layer with the specific demo code. So it's easy for people to read. They don't have to go through your entire style file. Like, that's pretty, so good Adam left. Where's he gone?
That's a mic drop. That's a
He's in a different layer now.
That's a panel mic drop.
I have returned. The login button is not the comment button. So I have a link I was going to share.
Import Adam layer. Sweet.
But yeah, that layer is really nice for doing demos, because yeah, you often open up a CodePen, you're like, where's the good stuff? Show me the juice. I just want this sweet part of this that is making it all work. And so yeah, you're like, well, cool. Here's that little chunk. It's called demo. And the rest of it is called demo support. So here, ignore the demo support unless you want to know how I centered my layout. But if you're curious at how I wrote that rad gradient, it's very succinctly right here in this layer. And that's good stuff. It's good for teaching. It's good for organization. It's good for... Anyway, layers, y'all.
I was gonna say, I guess scope's another one that's worth mentioning, but it's not one that I've played with as much. I don't know if you have, Adam, but
I just was recently playing with it with layers. I put scoped styles inside of layers just because I was like, there's so many interesting things coming. I did mean to share that to the public channel. Thank you, but I don't have access to it for some reason. So if you want to paste that link, that'd be cool.
I'll be your VA. It's fine.
I need some proxies, some chat proxies. But yeah, I have played with scope, and scope is scope has one specific superpower. It has many. I wish Miriam was here to talk about scope, because they've got really great insights on it. But they recently gave a talk that I was listening to that I appreciated. There's two different types of scopes. There's a general scope, and then there's localized scopes. And if you can, and you think about your components this way, you can think about your styles that way. That like your themes are this general scope. Because then you could think like dark theme is a scope to dark. You have a light theme that's scope to dark. These are two generics that are, grouped inside of this like style that they need. And then you have like local scopes. There's the third part where you could end a selector. So a selector could target just itself and nothing else. So you don't have to worry about any styles leaking down the tree. You literally can stop it. And that's a special superpower that even layers can't do. Layer can trap specificity and do some really interesting things there, but @scope could literally say this color of this font size, whatever all these inherited styles are, they stop inheriting because you chopped off its ability. And so we're just getting more and more control over these things that are typical foot guns, things that make it difficult to create architectures and create these strategies. More features are coming out to let you control those. But yeah, it's going to take time to percolate through all the libraries. It's going to take time to percolate through our own minds. And yeah, @scope, you can try it in Chrome Canary right now, and @layers in every major browser except IE. So if you got to support IE, you can't do layers. But yeah, it's cool stuff.
Okay, well, we've had a lot of great conversations around component libraries, and so I had a question around, a lot of teams are looking to build their own component libraries or use existing open source software or paid libraries. And so my question was, how should teams decide whether they should go build their own or adopt an existing one? So I'm just very curious to hear your guys' thoughts surrounding teams' decision moving forward, whether they should create their own or should use an existing solution out there.
Any of our component library authors want to argue whether we should or shouldn't use your component library?
I think I can. I think I can go first, right? So I mean, I'd say like the ultimate answer is always it depends, right? So it depends on several factors. I think the biggest one for me is sort of like the timeline you've got. I mean, it's if you have to release a feature in the next 1 month and you don't have anything and you're starting from zero, that definitely impacts your choice of how you want to go about building that. So there's a high chance that you want to use an open source component library like Chakra UI or Material UI or Mantine or any of those component libraries out there that get you from zero to shipped really fast. And I think it also depends on the strength of the team you have currently. If you've got a team of junior developers, there's a high chance that if you tell them to architect a CSS system or an utility class system to manage the design system, that is going to end up in hell right away. I mean, the next 6 months when you look at that file, you'll be like, oh my God, what did I do? What did I tell these folks to do, right? So, but I think that if you've got like a pretty solid team and you have like a product that has launched, because design systems or component libraries are things that they are made to serve the product, right? Design system is a product itself that serves the actual product that the customer uses, right? So if you don't have any end product just yet, sometimes it could be premature to start to build a design system because you don't even know what you need to build just yet, right? So I would in that case I would recommend that you use an open source component library. Try to build something out there, and as you compose the components, as you build your products, you start to see the use cases that are specific to your own product or your own company or the feature that you're working on. And afterwards, you can then start to extract out design systems and then make the decision of, do we stick with this open source component library or do we now start to build our own out of those, right? But definitely, so you buy a lot of time by just using an open source component library. But if you've got a pretty solid team of developers that you and you feel like you've got the budget to staff folks to maintain a design system, because design system maintenance is a thing, right? Building a design system and just saying, hey, it's out there, it's shipped. It doesn't end there, right? So it's an ever evolving artifact. So making sure you've got like budget to actually like take care of design system over time as it evolves is a huge thing for the company. So if you don't have that budget, then definitely embrace open source. But if you do have the budget, for sure, it's always a good thing for sure to have your own in-house staff for design systems.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I can add to that is how important is the brand and how important is the application that you're building to stand on the brand. And I worked at like really, really big companies where they did not really have a strong brand language or like that makes the brand. So over there, we used open source libraries and we customized a really tiny bit. and that is cool. But then on the opposite, I worked at tiny companies where the app had to look a very certain way, and we had designers who had a very strong brand background, and there we invested in the design system and the token library for it from the start. So it wasn't even about how many people we had, it was about how much of an investment do we want to make in this, like Sid said. So I'd say if it matters to you, then you probably build your own. But if it doesn't, don't just build it because everyone else is building it, because it takes so much work. Definitely not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is true at CSS itself, let alone component libraries, that sometimes people feel, I mean, this is true with JavaScript libraries. Sometimes people feel like, oh, I'm going to extract this code and use it in so many places. And it's only ever used in the application it was built in the first time. So sometimes if you're going to do a component library, but it's only ever used in that one app, that one module or whatever else, maybe that wasn't the, where you needed to invest. But my follow-up question for this is something that I've seen teams struggle with a lot lately, and I think I've seen arguments form on Twitter around this, and I'm curious if there's actually something that's worth discussing or understanding here, or if this is like a bike shedding moment. A bunch of developers just love to argue about things that don't matter in the end. But there's been conversations with component libraries, especially third-party ones, about whether or not, say you're a React application. Well, should the component library you use be a React component library? Should it use web components? Should it just be, pure CSS and style backgrounds? What are the thoughts there? Is that actually a trade-off that's very meaningful? Are there implications to this that developers should really be aware of? Or is this maybe less important other than, as long as the bundle size, don't put the React component library in an Angular app, maybe, for example? Like, are there other concerns to think about with this?
I could definitely go on this one. I think that it sounds cool if I said I made my design system in web components, right? There's just this nice, if I say like it's framework agnostic, it works everywhere, and people are like, oh, that's awesome, that's amazing, that's what I want to use. But at the same time, I think in the end, it boils down to the purpose, right, of the design system. What is built to? What the design system serves. If I have like a team where we've got a React team and a Vue team, and they both have to share the same set of components, then it makes sense to think about like, how do you want to model your design system components? Web components, React, Vue, those are different choices. We've got like even more choices now. We've got mitosis, which is also a way to transpile like a React component to Vue, to Svelte, to Swift UI. We've also got state machines, which is a way to describe the logic of a component with X state and stately, and it goes on and on like that. But I think that in the end, it still comes back to it depends, right, on like what you really want to achieve with the design system. It's not We don't build a design system because it's just cool to have one, right? We build a design system because it serves a specific purpose for the company. For example, if you've got like different systems you want to integrate with, and these systems need your own brand, they need your own components. You could look into like web components, like using Lead or Stencil. Those are awesome technologies that help you build those really fast. But in the end, if you've got a very simple app, I don't see any reason why you should. If it's a very simple React app, I don't see any reason why you should do that with web components or Vue.js. Just keep it. Usually, if your app is in React, it's best to basically start with a React component library because the mental overhead and complexity that you have to think about is pretty limited. But then when you go to a much broader scope, like web components, there's a whole lot of integrations with the framework that you have to deal with, and the way you think about modeling components in that broad way, it's a bit like it's quite a lot to think about to wrap your head around. So keep it simple. You've got the React app. I pretty much start with the React component library. Then if you find that you have need for multiple frameworks, then you can definitely extend those to framework agnostic layers like Lead or Stencil if you need to.
Well, I tell you what, it's a crime to get a topic this good and a group together that's this interesting, and only give us an hour to have a conversation. Unfortunately, our conversation has moved very quickly to the end of that hour. So to wrap us up, even though there's so much that we'd love to talk about, I guess we'll just go around quickly and give everyone a chance. If you want to point anybody towards something, it could be your socials. We'll make sure all that's in the description so that they can find y'all. But if it's someplace that you want to point them or something that you just had a last thought that you wanted to share with the group, I'll pass it around. So Julian, you want to start us up?
No, just wanted to say, as you said, Sage, keep it simple. Try to choose the good tools, and not because it's something trendy. Try to focus on keeping it simple, whatever the tool it is.
Great. Yeah, always good to know why you're using the thing that you're choosing to use too. Anthony?
Yeah, I don't have anything in my mind. So yeah, everybody have a good day.
All right. Jay?
I was expecting to be much later in this list. Come and find me on Twitter and check out web.dev. Check out web.dev Chrometober 2022. Go check it out. That's a project from our team, highlighting all lots of cool things. And I'm sharing lots of things about what I'm working on. I'm working on scrolling animations, CSS has, OpenUI, pop-up, and all cool things, just like Adam. So yeah. Come ask questions.
Love to hear all the new features coming out. It's been very exciting.
Yeah.
All right, Siddharth?
Yeah, I don't have anything to plug. I guess I'll plug my Twitter. Come follow me for bad ideas.
That's perfectly stated, development Twitter. Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to add on the way out?
There we go. I'd help if I unmute myself. No, I think it was just a great conversation, and the community really enjoyed it. So thanks for everyone for coming out, and it's been fun.
All right, Sage?
Yeah, for me, thank you. Thanks for having me here. You can follow me on Twitter at Segun Adebayo. I'm currently working on Zag.js, which is a framework agnostic set of UI components built with state machines. So if you're geeking out about state machines, design systems, feel free to follow me.
I'm so sad we didn't get to talk about it. That's like my thing I'm so excited about too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely reach out.
Set up another panel.
I know, right? Or podcast. We'll get you on the podcast. Adam?
Appreciation for everybody's comments. Zag and open props definitely need some I don't know, hacking. I don't know, you want to get on a stream? Let's build some components.
Let's
I'll
do
style
it.
them. You bring the bones, I'll bring the skin, and we'll put some rad clothes on it, make it look all sweet. I don't know. Open props, by the way, is a fun, if you already have a design system, maybe you don't have easings, and you can just steal the ones I made for you. So you get 5 different flavors of ease out, for example, or I even have some free bouncy ones that are in there. So check out open props for either your design system starter or augmentations. And other than that, see me on Twitter for all the new stuff that's coming out in CSS. It's my job to be on top of it, and I love it and shout it out all the time. So
why didn't I say that? That's a good line.
There you go. Well, with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for attending this State of CSS Frameworks. We are so glad that you're here today. As I said, the conversation doesn't stop here. Reach out to all of our wonderful panelists on Twitter to keep the conversation going, and we hope to see you at the next one. So have a great day. Thank you, everybody.